very much. Oh,
So, very nice to see you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Secretary General, thank you very much for this opportunity. My first question is on Ukraine. In this summit, NATO pledged a long-term support for Ukraine so that Ukraine can prevail. But what does victory for Ukraine look like, and how soon do you think that's achievable?
Well, it has to be for the Ukrainians to define what is an acceptable outcome of this war, because this is a war aggression. Russia has launched a war by choice, attacked a peaceful democratic nation in Europe, invaded it 2.5 years ago. Our responsibility is to support Ukraine so Ukraine can prevail as a sovereign independent nation in Europe. We know that the best way to end this war is actually to send a clear message to Moscow that we have a long-term commitment of strong support to Ukraine, because then President Putin in Moscow will understand that they cannot achieve their goals on the battlefield, but to sit down and accept a solution where Ukraine prevails.
Okay. Well, my second question is about the American leadership. Well, former president and Republican candidate for the next president, Mr. Trump, has been showing different perspectives on in terms of how to address the Ukrainian situation in Russia. And he sometimes criticizes NATO, and he insists that he can end the war in one day. Well, are you concerned about it, and how will NATO coordinate with the United States under President Trump?
Well, I worked with former President Trump for 4 years when he was president, and during that time we were able to have a strong policy on Ukraine. It was actually under his time as president that the United States started to deliver javelins, anti-tank weapons. That was not obvious back then, before the invasion. I also think that everyone realizes that, of course, the quickest way to end the war is to lose a war. But that doesn't bring peace. That will bring occupation, and occupation is not peace. So unless we want to lose, to see that President Putin wins in Ukraine, then we need to provide military support to Ukraine, to send a clear message to Moscow that they cannot wait us out. So the paradox is that the stronger our support is, the longer our commitment is, the sooner this war can end.
Okay. So my third question is on China and my country, Japan. The summit declaration states that China has become a decisive enabler of Russia's war, and called for China to stop support for Russia. Does NATO have concrete measures or concrete strategy to change China's attitude, and how do you think Japan can contribute as a NATO partner on this matter?
Yes, absolutely. I met with the Chinese Prime Minister now at the NATO summit, and I commended, I met with the Japanese Prime Minister here at the NATO summit, and I commended Japan for its very clear message on the war in Ukraine, and also the fact that Japan has decided to step up the partnership with NATO, and also the fact that Japan is now investing in its armed forces. It will bring Japan up to the NATO standard of investing 2% of GDP on defense, which I think sends a clear message also to Beijing and China that we are together. NATO will remain a regional alliance of North America and Europe, but we very much appreciate the close cooperation partnership with Japan. I also welcome that Japan has implemented economic sanctions against Russia, because what happens in Ukraine today can happen in Asia tomorrow, as the Japanese Prime Minister has stated several times, and I totally agree with him.
Okay. My last question is about the unity of NATO. Well, the Hungarian Prime Minister Orban sometimes criticizes NATO. And he criticizes the American administration for having war policy. And he praises Mr. Trump as the person of peace. And in some nations, we see some so-called Ukraine fatigue. Do you think NATO can be as united in the future as it is now?
Again, in democratic societies, we don't have guarantees. But I expect that, and I am confident that NATO allies will continue to support Ukraine for long haul, partly because we have stated it so clearly, but also partly because it is obviously in our security interest. The challenge is that if President Putin wins in Ukraine, it will not only be a tragedy for the Ukrainians, it will be dangerous for all of us. It will send a message to President Putin, but also to President Xi, that when they use military force, when they invade another country, they get what they want. And therefore, what happens in Ukraine will also impact decision-making in Beijing when it comes to the potential use of military force against neighbors. So therefore, since it's in our interest that Ukraine prevails, I expect that European allies and Canada, and European allies and North America, Canada and United States will continue to support Ukraine. We also seen that actually allies are stepping up; they are delivering more. And at the summit, we just agreed new important measures to provide more support: a NATO command for Ukraine, a long-term financial pledge for Ukraine, and there were significant new announcements of additional support. And again, Japan contributes to NATO's comprehensive assistance package for Ukraine with different types of non-lethal support, very important. So we welcome also the contributions by Japan to our efforts to support Ukraine.
Okay, Secretary General, thank you very much.
Thanks so much for having me.
NEWSDIG